Welcome to another Community Conversations. I'm your host, Ian Parkinson, and I'm here today with Michelle Sauve from What Matters to Hatters. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
So, next week's a big week.
Yes, it's Global Loneliness Awareness Week, and what matters to Hatters is encouraging random acts of connection in our community. So, really, just those simple moments in everyday life where we might connect with someone we know or don't know and create a contact, feel a connection, helps us to feel happier, less lonely, and can increase our sense of belonging in the community.
This loneliness seems, and social isolation even, seems to be a much bigger issue than it has been pre COVID.
Hmm.
And we were talking earlier where you mentioned that, even the design of the subdivisions doesn't really lean itself towards social interaction.
Right. So we heard a lot about isolation and loneliness during the pandemic, a lot, but really it's been happening for decades. And the beginnings of it were most likely the building of our communities, where we saw neighborhoods have garages in the front rather than
Yeah.
the back. We lost our boulevards, and so people, are working more. They're working longer hours. They drive home into their garage and into their house, and you don't see your neighbors, right? So that was kind of the beginning. And then we saw that with the advent of the internet,
Yeah.
people tended to enjoy being on their computers, then the cell phones and smartphones, and then COVID. So that really hit home for loneliness and social isolation.
So, what events do you have scheduled for Global Loneliness Week?
So, what matters to Hatters is, of course, creating awareness through our social media platforms, Twitter and Facebook. And we also have partnered with the station, a local coffee shop, and the School District 76 Hug and My Place mental health capacity building projects. And so, students from that school district have decorated coffee sleeves, and at the station, if you get a coffee to go, you'll get a decorated coffee sleeve from one of the students, and then there's a sticker on it just identifying that it's Loneliness Awareness Week. And you can scan a QR code to learn more about that. And we also encourage people to follow us on Facebook and Twitter.
So, is loneliness the same as being alone?
No, in fact, sometimes those two are seen as interchangeable, but the reality is that loneliness is something that mostly feels negative for us,
Okay.
and we don't have control over that. Whereas when we choose to be alone, that's an active choice that we've made, and so there can be that confusion around those two. Alone time, of course, is so important in our busy world. We often feel like we're on all the time,
Yes.
so the opportunity to be alone is important to many of us, but feeling lonely shouldn't be a part of that equation.
Right. Solitude is not being lonely.
Right, yeah. And we do want people to understand that loneliness is a normal human emotion,
Hmm.
just like happiness or anger or sadness. And it's not something that we should not talk about. In fact, we want to encourage people to talk about experiences of loneliness as well.
We were talking earlier, you mentioned that loneliness is not just, it's a cultural thing, especially for like immigrants or new people to town that have moved, say, to Medicine Hat from Toronto.
Well, it can be. So we know that there are certain populations that are more impacted by loneliness than others. And so, for example, people who move here from another country and then they don't have any other family or friends here, that could certainly cause impact
Yes.
their sense of loneliness. And so we know that we need to do better at being welcoming to newcomers to our community. And of course, we have many great agencies in Medicine Hat that do that. We also know that people who have a relationship breakup or are suffering any sort of bereavement, people who are transitioning from living at home with their parents to moving out on their own or going to university, people who are recently divorced or unexpectedly single.
Yeah.
So there are lots of different people who might experience loneliness more than maybe the general population. Also, our gender diverse population oftentimes feels
Yeah.
more isolated and alone. And so it's important that we have agencies and community groups who can reach out and support those folks.
Is there such a thing as a loneliness hotline?
Well, not so much a loneliness hotline in Canada. In some countries, there's actually, and this some of these are pre-pandemic. They have appointed ministers of loneliness. So the
Oh,
UK and Japan, for example, have had ministers of loneliness for several years, and so they are making great strides on addressing loneliness. We're making our way in Canada. There's great conversations. We do, of course, have our national hotline if someone is feeling at risk for
yeah.
suicide, 988, of course, but not a loneliness hotline yet. But there are so many amazing resources in this community that can help people to feel more connected to their community. And so maybe not a 24/7, but you can reach out to a lot of agencies in this community to feel more connected.
Well, I could. It's. I guess I look at this. I know, and you know, that there are a lot of these resources are available. But for somebody who's brand new in Medicine Hat, who, let's say, their English is not their
Hmm.
first language,
Hmm.
would there be one focal point they could call or show up and say, "Hi, I'm new in town"?
Well, absolutely. I think connecting with SAMUS
Okay.
Immigration would be a great resource. We also have our Medicine Hat Local Immigration Partnership, and they do a lot of work that is in the community helping people to feel more connected. But we have some really good programs in our community at our library, and so that's one that I always recommend to people if they're feeling a disconnect or they want to try something new. You know, for instance, in Medicine Hat, you can go to stitching in the afternoon. You can do Spanish or French lessons on Saturdays, or conversation rather, not
Great.
lessons. There's also a walking group at the library, and we're excited to share that we're going to be offering two more speed friending events at the library in June and two more in August. The first one that we had about a month and a half ago was so popular that they had a wait list, and now we've again we'll be able to offer those both in August and June. So.
The public library seems to be becoming a very significant focal point of our community. They've moved from dusty bookshelves to some pretty significant heavy programs in the community.
Our public library is amazing, and to me, they are the unsung hero of our
Yeah.
community, helping our vulnerable people, but everyone to feel like they belong. So, if people have not been to their library in a while, I really encourage Hatters to check it out and visitors as well.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are some other, not everybody wants to go to the library. So for gentlemen, especially men 50 plus, there's a free program at the Viner Center called the Men's Shed,
Mm,
which is Mondays from 11 till 12. You do have to call, I believe, and register, but completely free. You don't need a Viner Center membership. So that's one option. And then for people who maybe are new to the community but are quite physically active or they want to volunteer, every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. in Strathcona Island Park, we have the park run. And so you do have to pre register. You just
yeah.
go online to Strathcona Island Park Run. But that's another example. And the truth is, we just have so many free or low cost activities in our community. And so during the week of Global Loneliness Awareness, we will be trying to encourage and share some of those options for people
Great.
so that they can, if they follow us, be more informed about what's available in Medicine Hat.
So if you're not sure, call the public library or call the Viner Centre.
Yeah, and again, other options are SAMUS Immigration.
Yes.
You can also follow What Matters to Hatters on Facebook and Twitter, and we will, of course, be trying to share what's available and low cost or no cost in our community.
So we were talking earlier, and you mentioned a rather startling statistic that 16 to 25-year-olds are the most at risk for loneliness.
Yeah, so during the pandemic, it was noted in a survey that that was our highest age group population for loneliness. There's a common misconception that generally it's seniors that are
Mm,
the most lonely, but they, many seniors live in communities, and if they don't, they're here, they're connected to our Viner Center. Some aren't, of course, but Viner Center also has outreach into people's homes. And so it's believed that, because of smartphones and also the impacts of the physical isolation during the pandemic,
right.
that those numbers shot up so high for teens. But because of that, And then, for some of those youth, persistent loneliness has developed into anxiety or depression. It's made it even harder to reach out and connect to their peers and to others. So it's really important to note that just because someone is young and going to school and maybe active, they might not feel connected. And that's another important point to make, I think, Ian, for people, is that we can live with others and we can be experiencing many relationships. But for some people, sometimes they don't feel fulfillment in those relationships,
Yeah.
and they might seem like they're doing great, but they might be one of the loneliest people we know, despite being surrounded by family and friends.
Yeah, the Beatles song is going through the back of
Oh,
my
okay,
head
yeah,
as we speak.
yeah.
Um, we did random acts of kindness for last month. I think it's probably worthwhile asking people to continue to do that during
Hmm.
Loneliness Month.
Hmm.
Just smile, say thank you, hold the door open for somebody.
Right. We're actually just switching the wording a little bit. We're calling it random acts of connection this month. So you can still imagine it as kindness or connection, but really the idea is when we are fit, um, kind to people and other people observe it, it actually encourages happiness
Yeah.
in others, and kind of a domino effect where people will go on to do something similar. So if we randomly connect with others, for instance, it's standing in line at the grocery store, rather than going to the self checkout, go
Yes.
to the checkout with the staff person and just strike up a conversation. And sometimes, if you have some honest and genuine um, nice thing to say, that can change that person's trajectory of their day.
Yes.
So someone in line might be impatient and annoyed with the line, and they hear you have that interaction, and it might just change their day as well, completely unknown to the person having the conversation with the checkout person.
So, what are the effects of loneliness?
Well, long-term chronic loneliness actually it can be quite detrimental to our physical and mental health, and it's actually been touted to be one of the biggest health concerns of this decade. So we know that loneliness has been linked to early death, an increased risk of heart disease, stroke, depression, cognitive decline, and poor sleep. And in fact, loneliness can be as harmful to our health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So quite impactful. People who feel lonely are more than twice as likely to develop Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia than those who do not feel lonely. So, when we talk about loneliness and say, oh, it's just a difficult emotion, just buck up, you'll be okay. The reality is we need to address loneliness so that it doesn't become chronic and long-term in individuals, because its impacts are so profound.
So, we talked about this earlier, there is no real loneliness hotline. But if somebody is suffering from loneliness or the effects, who would they call?
Well, we would encourage people to reach out to their family doctor. Now, we know that people often don't have family doctors if they're new to the community. So perhaps you could reach out to a pastor, a mental health therapist, someone you've connected with on your journey if you're new to the city, at least somebody who is able to have a listening ear and connect you to other services in our community, because it's so important that people establish connection and feel that anchor and grounding in their community.
Okay, thank you for coming in, Michelle.
Thanks for having me.
This was another community conversation with What Matters to Hatters. Thank you for watching.